And we have a wonderful gentleman who's agreed to come to us from the Atlanta Regional Commission, gentleman by the name of Mike Carnathan. Let me go through his bio real quick because it's a really great bio. Mike Carnathan is the manager of the Research and Analytics Division at the Atlanta Regional Commission and is one of the founders of the Neighborhood Nexus, which is a community intelligence system for the Atlanta region that provides data, tools, and expertise as a catalyst to create opportunity for all of the region's citizens. Mike oversees a compilation of thousands of various indicators that tell the data story about the Atlanta region. One of Mike's chief challenges is to help the community groups tell their story through a data-driven approach. Mike has worked with numerous community groups, including the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Families First, United Way, the Community Foundation for a Greater Atlanta, among with a host of statewide and local education agencies and other community groups to help them better understand the neighborhoods in which they work. A native of Georgia, Mike holds degrees in history and journalism, along with a master in public administration from the University of Georgia. All right, Mike, I think we put a mouthful for you, so we're gonna let you take it from here, buddy.
All right, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen, and Kevin, will you just give me the?
Let me give you the
Oh,
wheel.
wait a minute. Now it says I cannot share my screen while you're sharing, so you have to stop sharing.
Yeah, let me stop. I'm stopping. You got the wheel now.
Okie doke, now I got it. And let me know if you see my screen.
Let's see, you are coming up. There you are, we got you.
Okay. Awesome, so thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for inviting me here. And as the slide says, we're going to be taking a very quick look at the state of housing in DeKalb. I am going to be trying to answer that question. So what's this housing crisis that we're talking about? And before I get into my slides, let me just say that, I've worked at the Atlanta Regional Commission I'm going into my 23rd year now, and I've never seen a housing market like this, just not ever. Typically when you see economic downturns like we had in the Great Recession or even some of the recessions before that, housing actually kind of goes down with the rest of the market. When the pandemic hit, we had that massive economic downturn. We had all the job loss because of the shutdown orders. And so we were all expecting the housing market to do the same, kind of go down with the rest of the economy. It actually did the opposite. So now what we're left with is the hottest, craziest housing market that we've seen in years. And so I'm going to talk about that. And I'm going to talk about a number of different things. And I am going to end up talking about institutional investors because we've done some research around that, and particularly about kind of the spatial location of those institutional investors. But overall, this presentation is mostly about the affordability crisis that we have. And let me make no bones about it. It is a crisis. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is how that we at the Atlanta Regional Commission look at this affordability crisis. So from a regional perspective, and you're going to look at this slide and you're going to say, well, yeah, no duh. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to come up with strategies and tactics and ideas essentially around these 6 buckets. And we think that if we can make progress in all of these 6 buckets, or really any of these 6 buckets, we will begin to make progress in addressing this affordability crisis. And so I'm not going to read the slides, but it's some combination of, yes, we have to increase supply. We have to preserve the affordable supply we already have. We have to just reduce the overall costs of housing, and particularly the role that transportation has in increasing our housing costs. We have to find a way to get more housing capital onto the ground. We have to promote housing stability. That may be the first and that may be the most important thing. is we have to make sure that we're keeping families in their housing. And finally, we're going to have to, kind of just have a reckoning here among our leadership is, we're going to have to start making some tough choices, some tough policy choices on making sure that we don't go the way of the San Franciscos and the Seattles of the world, where, those places are becoming increasingly unlivable because you just can't find any place to live. And that does require leadership. That requires hard choices. And so I just wanted to introduce this just to let you know how we at the ARC view the affordability crisis and, some specific things that we're looking for. So on to the supply. And this is probably the most important factor in why home prices have increased as much as they have. We're just not building enough. This slide this is the national slide, but what it's showing you is that if by population adjusted single family housing starts, we're at least or at most half, sometimes a third of the levels of housing starts that we've seen in any of the previous 5 decades. All right. And so that just, this is probably the simplest way to say we need to be building more housing. So think back to, just economics 101, supply and demand. If your demand is holding relatively constant and your supply is falling off a cliff, well, that's going to increase prices. And that's exactly what we see. So this slide is actually customed to kind of as best I could with the tools that I have. This is custom to sort of the South DeKalb area. And what you'll see up in the top left of your slide is, you'll see that bar graph, and you'll see, it's sort of a normal bell curve where, the 250 to 300K is kind of the, the plurality of the price point of houses that closed last year. But you'll see that there's more houses being closed on in the 300s and the 400s than there are houses being closed on in the 100s and the 200s. And so this is the story of not only of South DeKalb, it's the story of everywhere. And so you'll see last year, the median sales price for South DeKalb area is $275,000. And there's a months of supply of about 1.1 months. And so that's essentially, let's call that about 35 days. Now, in a normal market that's balanced between a buyer's market and a seller's market, a normal months of supply is 6 months. Here in South DeKalb, it's 1.1. And so what that means is this affordability crisis just keeps growing and growing and growing because we simply don't have the supply. Now, the other aspect of this slide, and this is in the lower right, what we did with this tool, and it's called Market Insight, is we could look at high school attendance zones, and we can look at what the average sales price of those attendance zones were, and we can compare them to 5 years earlier. And so if you look at that dark blue column, the percent change from 5 years ago, you'll see that all these home prices in Cedar Grove High School, Columbia High School attendance zones, Miller Grove almost doubled. And so you'll see just, this is something that and I'm not saying that the affordability crisis just now popped up. I'm saying that in the last 5 years, it has gone into sort of like supercharged mode. And so let's take another look, and let's look at this a little bit more spatially. And so what you're looking at here is home prices in 2013. And we're looking at a neighborhood by neighborhood across the entire region. And, you can focus on South DeKalb. And so what you're looking at in South DeKalb in 2013, you had affordable options in South DeKalb. You could buy homes for the upper 100s or the 200s. It was really the northern part of the region in 2013 that prices were beginning to become unaffordable. Now this is like a full 9 years ago. So I'm going to run through the next 7 years of which we have data for, and look how this map changes. Okay, so here's 2014, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And we're processing the 2021 data, and I've got a sneak peek. We still have to do some adjustments to it, but guess what? It looks worse in 2021. Now, what you're asking yourself is, wait, where did all those yellow areas go? Well, there's no more yellow areas. There's barely even any orange areas anymore. And so the why that we at the ARC are calling this a crisis is because right now in this region, if you're a moderate income family looking to buy a home, you're going to struggle to find that place. If you're north of I-20, you're probably not going to find that place. And increasingly, even south of I-20, in areas like South DeKalb and Clayton and Henry County, you're beginning to struggle to find anything in that price range that could be considered affordable to a moderate income family. So that's the home ownership side. But guess what? Rents have been rising too. So if you're priced out of the home ownership market, you're not finding any relief in the rental market either. And this is, again, kind of my best attempt at looking at South DeKalb rents. Now, South DeKalb rents aren't as high as the regional rents as a whole, but you can see how much they've ramped up even in the last 2 years. So we have a situation where you're being priced out of the home ownership market. Rents are rising too. And so evictions, we've been talking about evictions throughout the entire pandemic. That issue hasn't gone away. And in fact, if you look at South DeKalb, where eviction filings are really the kind of the strongest in the entire region. Now, what I do want you to do is take a picture of that mentally, take a picture of this image mentally, because this becomes more germane once I show you some additional maps that looks at institutional investors. And so that's what we're going to do now. Now, I know we've heard lots and lots of information about institutional investors. We've had lots of different companies, lots of different research shops look at this institutional investor, this kind of institutional investors buying up single family housing, renting it out. So we did that research too, but we went about it in a slightly different way. We looked at it, we're really looking at just the largest institutional investors, those who own at least 100 properties in the region. And what we found is if you look at that, so first of all, there's a couple of different ways to do it. Now, the data we have are always going to be imperfect. So what we have to do is we have to look at parcels, and we have to look at the ownership field, and we have to do some keyword searches like LLC or trust or Inc., to kind of distinguish between just John Doe owning the house versus a business owning the house. And so once we went through that process, we found around 160,000 homes that were owned by some sort of business. Now, we also did an extra step as we kind of went out and threw away a bunch of things that had trust in it, because guess what? It could be owned by a land trust. Those aren't institutional investors. It could be owned by Habitat for Humanity. They have the LLC in their ownership code. So Habitat for Humanity isn't an institutional investor. So we went the extra step to kind of cull out, kind of these LLCs that are kind of nonprofits versus, stuff that are owned by what we know are big businesses. And then we even narrowed it down to just the big six. And you'll see that of that 160,000 that are owned by all kinds of different businesses, could be a family trust, 44,000 of those are owned by just 6 companies. And here they are: Invitation Homes, First Key Homes, American Homes for Rent, Progress Residential, Main Street Renewal, and Tricon Residential. And typically their business models are to buy up single family homes and rent them out. And so you'll see kind of the percentages of what's on the ground now and what the percentage is owned by these big 6. And it's pretty substantial. So now let's take a look at the map. And so this map is just every one of those big 6 that I just talked about. Each dot represents 2 single family residential homes that these companies own. Now, remember when I told you to take that mental snapshot of where evictions are the highest? Well, guess what? That's where these places are buying single family residential for home ownership. And so you'll see this is a very familiar pattern, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit with some other maps. And so you'll see this is kind of the same map, but here we're just looking at the percentage of housing stock that's owned by these big 6. Again, you'll see that very distinct pattern. It's a U shape that kind of goes down, starting kind of in Cobb County through South Fulton, all the way through Clayton, and through South DeKalb up into Gwinnett. And then finally, and this is the last slide, if you look at where the growth in Black and African American population has occurred, and then you look at where the big 6 institutional owners are, very similar maps. And so we've even heard at ARC that, kind of this institutional investor trend is almost kind of like a new red line, because you'll see just how well they match up. And the problem that we see from this is, buying up these homes and renting them out is denying home ownership opportunities for families that can begin to build generational wealth. And that's why we consider it a problem. And that is, this is actually my last slide, just to kind of go back to our regional housing strategy. And again, encouraging you to jump on this site, look at some of the data we have on this site, and then kind of understand some of the solutions out there that we're proposing as part of our regional housing strategy. And that is my presentation. And I know that we're going to save questions till the end, so I will just stop sharing my screen as soon as I can figure out how to do so.
Wow, that's fabulous, Mike. I appreciate this. This was good stuff. I think one of the things, and probably you can maybe co-sign on this, was really we're talking about what the takeaway is from. We have pressures on rents, pressures on housing costs, lack of supply, and then we also have this mysterious machine in the background operating and investing, gobbling up our communities.
And that's right. And there's a very